Several years ago, back in 2010, I did a video, Alex Ansary's Message to the Children. And here I am 8 years later, and I'm pondering the social engineering of the generation or group called the Millennials. So there's a number of things that I want to talk about. And it seems just yesterday that I was a teenager, that I was in my 20s. I'm actually going to be 38 coming up in February of this year. So the generation behind me, I heard something interesting. It may have been a coast-to-coast program. It may have been somewhere else, but it talked about how those that are born during particular periods are imprinted with the energy going on at that time. A lot of people think just simply astrology and your sign. But if you look a little deeper at what is called birth trauma, and there's information out there about circumcision and other things and things that are common today in modern medicine that in fact cause birth trauma. But another unseen, lesser known influence, you could even say over an entire generation, could be an event. Now, what event was it that was taking place at the time in which those were born that are currently about 17 years old, almost of age to serve in the military, almost 18 years old? So we have a generation born during 9/11. And throughout their whole life, they've lived in the post-9/11 world. In the surveillance society, police state, dystopian reality that we live in now. And so, going to the next point, I live in a world where as far back as I can remember when it comes to futurism, and I see a difference between a lot of the New Age fables and genuine spiritual teachings and ideas that have been around for thousands of years, but people do confuse the two. What I've never accepted into my reality are the modern New Age fables, or as Mark Passio would call it, the New Age bullshit. Don't look at the negative, we're ascending. And there are people out there that have dabbled in particular theories that are basically their New Age version of the rapture and the idea of going out of body. And see, those schools of thought are where the same schools of thought in many cases come from, where they're talking about the crystal children. And there's been many promises of the crystal children. Now, I will say, if there is something special in terms of capability with regards to this generation that's been born during this time, also known as the millennials, it would make sense on the part of the controllers, and I would say the hidden controllers of the world, whether or not people believe in that. But there's a reason why mankind is being socially engineered. Let's talk about that more, towards a particular level, acclimated. And so if there is a gifted generation that the powers that be know is being born, and who's to say that it's one generation? I would say that, though. But for them to premeditatively make plans and preparations to distract. And that is what we see throughout humanity. A big distraction with regards to all these circuses. But let's talk about this millennial generation, aka the alleged crystal generation, bombarded with violent video games, given access to violent pornography if they know how to search for it on the internet, and ways of bullying each other online in ways, fast forward or go back in time. Going to go back in time, and the older viewers understand this, those that lived through the 70s. And as a young person, just to tell you briefly, a lot of my better friends were older than I, and a lot of my viewers, twice my age. I think that may be shifting with the times. Maybe there's a younger audience, but going back to Access TV, an older senior citizen audience for the most part that seemed to get it more than those my generation, because they had seen through certain things and other periods, and they can also remember when times were better. And there was also, like friends of the family that I knew through my mother, and there were stories told with regards to the 1970s in Portland, Oregon, and it sounded like some golden roaring years. A lot of cops and robbers, a lot of Wild West behavior. I would say in some ways we have evolved as a society in ways people can make a living working for themselves. I see elements of that era as being very violent and people being stuck in particular circumstances. The underworld, if you will. And that's a big part of our reality here in the United States is the underworld, or the below the surface reality that goes along. The drug running, the prostitution, things of that nature. So there's been a lot of hopes that people have had that people would evolve beyond some of those primitive things and things that we've seen in cities. It's like, at one point there was nothing there. Boom, there's a city. Boom, now there's a crack cocaine epidemic. Boom, now there's a drug war. Boom, now there's black helicopters. Boom, now there's false flag terror attacks. Boom, now there's a police state. Here we are in this reality. So here's some questions, for those that may even think that this is the ascension. We look at the atrocities in multiple countries to even mention them and be critical of massive lives lost is considered controversial. How have we lost our humanity? And we look at the direction that these millennials have been directed in. Now with the cell phone addiction, the smartphone addiction, from the gaming to all these other social media platforms. I guess Snapchat is one of them. So they have been exposed to this free flow of information technology, but it's like a flaming sword. It's double-edged. There is good information on the internet, and there is stuff that is toxic. And if you have a generation that is born up into a toxic environment with a lot of disinformation on the internet and music, we didn't even get into music. That would go have someone on, they could talk about a time when there was real music and a different sound coming from a record, crackling with that vibrant sound and frequency, very different than the modern sound coming from a modern desktop computer or from an iPhone. Not to mention that this current generation is being bombarded with this radiation from the cell phone towers to the smart meters to being exposed to geoengineering at levels that, again, previous generations were not exposed to. So we're literally seeing like alterations of human beings because their DNA is being altered. But see, here's the thing. Some of these same spiritual groups talked about a DNA upgrade. And a lot of this supposed channeled information coming from these supposed ascended masters that millions of people in this country have been following their talking points for decades, despite the multiple failed predictions. It's not all as extreme as Heaven's Gate. Kill yourself and get on the comment. It's like, no, it's coming. The shift is coming. The rapture's coming. And the major earthquake, 1999. You've heard me talk about the solar flares. And what I came to understand is there is something called catastrophophobia. And periods in which there are more people tapping into spiritual things. Catastrophophobia could be a result of a root cause response of heightened hormonal activity and thought wave patterns. It can also lead to paranoia. It can also lead to fights and out of balance behavior. It can also lead to greater insights for the person that's balanced and grounded. And that's something that I've been talking about for some time. But one thing that I've noticed is that there seems to be periods in which there's more channeling going on, just like there's more binge drinking going on, and even more wars going on. It almost seems that there are periods in which when we see more solar flares, the veil is thinner. But with that comes a lot of things. We could see from these same groups, and even on a more softer level, Stephen Greer, we should reach out to extraterrestrials to be ambassadors, end quote. Ambassadors to who and for what? Now, there are some people that claim to be abducted by some of these groups. Some call them the Greys. Some call them the Zetas. And even though they have a traumatic experience of having their eggs taken, they somehow have left with a programming, though, that it was for the greater good because it's our future selves coming back in time. There's a lot of deceptions is what I'm getting at that have been our society regarding the future. The good guys, the bad guys, even, in a mainstream New Age movement that for years avoided conspiracy theories, I can see after 2009, 10, 11, like fake news, disinformation, mixing conspiracy trash and New Age stuff about ascending masters and UFOs, intervening in a potential war between Obama and Putin and things of that nature. And then crossover between, the ascended master group and people over here saying the Baker's going to be arrested 2011. Wow, it's all going to shift. Baker's going to be arrested. And like a parallel in the psychosis between the fake conspiracy trash and the New Age bullshit. A bridging of the gap, if you will, that should not be. And so there are people out there that have lost their discernment. We can hope for a better generation and we can work for it, but to say that we've already arrived there to attempt a placebo effect or some sort of interpretation of the law of attraction. And there's misinterpretations of the law of attraction. For example, one person in Portland said, Alex, the geopolitical stuff we talk about, if you think about it, you can make it happen. That's pretty grand of a belief system, masquerading as spiritual. That if I'm aware of something and I'm discussing something and I'm recording or reporting on current events, that I'm going to help make it happen. The defenses of the United States. Hey, buddy, I got nothing to do with NORAD. That's a great stretch of the perception of how the law of attraction works. So the greater reality is, even within the law of attraction, there's more people can do, I would say, with applying that in the power of focus in collective manifestation or things of that nature than just simply personal gain, having a big house. And we see a lot of stuff on YouTube, bling, bling. Big YouTube channel, big cars, big money, yo, I'll make so much on whatnot, what, here's how to, just this cycle of materialism. Is that the crystal children that we've been waiting for? There's a Hopi saying, we are the ones that we have been waiting for. And now that could be interpreted different ways. Some people can get all egocentric and go, we're the ones that are going to change the world. But it really applies to everyone during old times and old periods. Like when I talk about we need to get beyond this mentality of who do we trust 100%? How do we learn to trust ourselves and discern between truth and fiction? That's what I say. And so I see, to go to the next level, this socially engineered, millennial, technology addicted generation that doesn't have much of an economic future and still has the toll of economic debt from student loans, what type of job market will be waiting for them in the future when robots are set to replace them? So then we look at the next level, we look at these geopolitical positionings and the obvious reality of a draft. As things go to a certain level as we enter the 2020s. By that time, and I'm going to take you to the year 2024. So in 2024, 2025, the group of humans born in and around 9/11 and after, think about after 9/11, they went into Iraq in 2003 and that vibrational frequency of war and that being brought back from the parents. And now we're like a military police state, constantly living under fear and fighting each other, people fighting each other in the streets without talking about issues. Is this the generation that's going to change the world for the better? So, focusing on this before I go to the next thought, 2024, 2025. You're going to have people 23, 24, 22, 21, 20. All of military age. They've changed things up, in case you've heard, with regards to the Pentagon and women serving at the front lines. And to a certain degree, there should be equality, right, on like a healthy, rational discussion level. But is it really about equality and raising women up when they're being sent to the front lines for these future wars? Okay, we need to think about that. We need to think about that in light of the destabilization of the family. Is it a good thing for so many families to be destabilized and people being raised in single-parent households? And have we seen some negative repercussions and fallout from what a lot of these modern relationships have turned into? And children basically being left to fend for themselves, being put in front of the TV, being handed a smartphone, and then having access to anything any of their friends send to them because they deliberately launched all of that and don't even have any safeguards in this police state to make sure that minors don't have access to violent content and programming. Not only do they have access to it, they're being targeted. As we are being targeted. There are some adults that are literally living as children. There was a time when men that were adults did not have the luxury to play video games full time. It just didn't exist. There were things like sports and other things and, ways in which people dated. And before the cell phone, people met each other first. It wasn't Facebook. It wasn't Matchmaker. It wasn't Plenty of Fish. And so times were simpler because people weren't bombarded with the same type of gender warfare, man hate and woman hate, both ideologies which I stand against, but both ideologies which are raging today. Humans are influential. Children are especially influential. So if these children don't have good parents that are going to teach them things about discernment and sexual morality, and they're going to go out and find out certain things on their own. Now, some humans are resilient. They can grow up and, I'm not going to put down anyone that lives in a trailer park, but, the stereotype of the trailer park society. Someone could grow up in a ghetto. Someone could grow up somewhere, but then make a life of themselves, even if they were abused by their parents, including sexually or other people. There are humans that have shown the ability to be resilient to trauma and programming or to overcome particular trauma. If anything, they would be the alleged crystal children, but to go beyond labels, a group of human beings that are able to override the programming and the mind control. I've talked about the superhero that I created in my own mind called the Insusceptible when I was in detention at the age of 12. Opened up a big dictionary size of that, put my finger on a random word, and it happened to be the Insusceptible, and did a few panels in front of the families teaching me how to do comic book art, which I got into for a few years, as well as comic books blowing for a few years. But it was about the superhero archetype. But I find that interesting all these years later regarding the content, what I found interesting as a little boy. And so if we talk about people that are abnormally human in a positive way, those are those that can override the programming and accomplish their dreams, but live in this world without being another greedy, selfish human who's using their power of creativity to just amass greater and greater estates and land. People have that ability. That ability could be channeled in a better direction. So the things that people need to be aware of is that it's good to be on the spiritual path and to look for information. But if you discount the reality of certain spiritual truths, are you on the spiritual path? So if people don't believe in karmic consequences with regards to widespread genocide and wars without end, it's like people tend to be choosy with their belief systems on karma and things of that nature. And it also could be flipped around. How is it positive if someone's saying that, well, that's not our problem, that's their karma if they were taken out of this world? Even if that is the case, and to a certain degree, I think everything happens for a reason to all of us. And we're not really victims even when certain things happen. But people use that as an excuse to legitimize their false claims that the world overall is more peaceful. And maybe just things are more complex than that. But I just want to close by saying I am concerned. I'm concerned at what's going to become of elements of this society that feels also abandoned by its government, abandoned by its family, abandoned by the current economic situation that will be tomorrow. And I think that we need to do our best to reach out and help those people through whatever means they can. All I know is that I should be speaking my mind. Maybe there is something special about this generation that's been born and why some of these events have been manufactured to take them off the path. So let us recenter on that path of awakening, of greater compassion, greater empathy, greater knowledge, and using the internet for the greater good as opposed to using the internet to target innocent people. I'm Alex Ansary, wrapping up today's video. We'll see you soon. I'm also posting to YouTube or DTube, and over at alexansary.tv, I'm sending out these videos via email. So if you can, please sign up today. Thank you for watching.